If you've been in church any time in your life, you've heard that story told. And if you've been at Victory any time, you've heard that story preached on. And so I thought I'd share something else with you about it. You got it? 1 Samuel 17? Okay, so follow along. And some of this, we're not going to read all of it, but some of this we'll have to skip through for the sake of time. But this is interesting how this works out. Look in verse 1. It says, "Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shoco, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shoco, Ezekah, and Ephstanim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines." Who started the battle? Who started the battle? You just read it in verse 2. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. Who started the battle? Okay, follow. "And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them." Okay, so for the sake of silliness, I want you to picture this. Israel is on one side, Philistines are on the other side. And what is between them? But who starts the battle? And the men, right? So Israel is here, and Israel says this: "Our army's better than your army." And the Philistines are on the other side, and they said, "Nuh-uh." And Israel says, "Uh-huh." And the Philistines said, "Uh-uh." But nobody's in the valley. Saul and those men says, "Set the battle array." They begin it. But nobody's in the valley yet. It says that they're on one side, and the Philistines are on the other side. But Israel, being God's people, decided somebody got to start the battle. But nobody's battling. They just started it. If you're missing this, get this picture in your head. We know that we have an enemy, and if we do not pursue, if we do not fight against that enemy, they'll prevail against us. Here's what happens. A lot of times Christians go, "Devil, you have no authority here." And the devil's on the other side going, "Uh-huh." And Christians are going, "Uh-uh." But nobody's attacking. It's all talk. It's all mouth. But nobody's fighting. A lot of times we give our testimony about how that Satan's whipped up on us during the week and we're struggling with things, but it becomes all talk. And we're not actually pursuing the battle. I just thought I'd show you that. Now go back to the passage, right? By the way, you miss that cool stuff if you read too fast. Look at verse 4. It says, "And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span." Now, for the sake of time, the measurement would have been he's 9 feet tall. "And he had an helmet of brass upon his head." Well, if he's 9 feet tall, his head's got to be huge. I'm thinking like Adam Goodman kind. You know what I'm saying? He's got a big head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. So he's got this garment that is massively weight. It says, "And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass." So it's a lot. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs. So now he's got that on him. and a target of brass between his shoulders. Now, I don't know if you catch what I caught in verse 6, but if you're going to walk around wearing a target, guess what you're going to be? The target. Yep. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. Okay, so the preparation of all this is very important. Because you know the story, so David's going to go down, he's going to get the 5 stones, he's going to put them in his bag, he's going to put one in the sling, and he's going to start spinning it around. And the sling went round and 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 round. And then one little stone went up in the air and the giant came tumbling down. That's the song that, by the way, that's not how it happened though. It says that he fell flat. And he fell backwards. He didn't fall forward. It's just or fall forward, not backwards. Anyway, it's a whole big thing. But here's what's interesting in the beginning of all this. So you got one army on this side, one army on that side, and they're both just kind of going, but nobody's in the battle. But Saul and his men have started this. They set this thing array. They're the ones who initiate the battle. But they don't send anybody into the valley yet. The Philistines did. And who did they send? A 9-foot tall monster. I mean, to them, if you're my height, 9 feet tall is pretty tall, right? I can't jump 9 feet. I mean, if you laid them out in front of me, I could jump over them, but I can't jump straight up in the air 9 feet tall. I'm just not able to do that. But there's Goliath. And Israel's still on this side going, but nobody's battling Goliath yet. Y'all with me so far? Then it begins to describe Goliath. He has got this massive helmet on top of his head. And you've seen, they come down like this, it protects the nose. And unless you get hit real hard, then it's like, you're like this, and there was one of his brothers that they thought was a dog because he kept calling his brother Mark. And he was like, Mark. But that's a whole other story. I'll go back to that later and tell you the rest of that. It's a funny story, I promise. But he's got this coat of mail, and you've probably seen the chains that they would weave together. So, and if you've ever picked up one that we would wear, they're still really heavy, right? But can you imagine a guy that's 9 feet tall and how much bigger that is, and then he's got it all on him, and that's got to weigh you down, right? Then he's got, his legs are covered also, and then he's got this staff that's a weaver's beam, and if you know what a weaver's beam is, they throw the bobbin through, pull the thread, and boom, boom, like this kind of thing. And them things are about that big around. So can you imagine a 9-foot tall guy, how big his hand is? He makes Adam look like a sissy. So his fingers are that long. But he can pick this thing up, and that's what he's got. But then it says that he had somebody with his shield, his protection, go before him. So he's not carrying his own shield. He's got somebody else that's there with him. I imagine that this guy's not 9 foot tall. That's my guess. Never mentions his height, doesn't talk much about him other than the fact that he was there. But can you imagine the size shield that Goliath would have had? Because when they would war, right, they would plant it in the ground. They would step behind it to guard off from the flying arrows. So for Goliath to be behind it, it would have had to have been as big as wide as, and at least as tall as Goliath could be to duck down behind it. Now imagine a guy my size working for a guy that size, and I got to carry his shield. Can you duck a little lower? So all this is going on. He's not out there by himself. So the Bible gives us all of the explanation of what we can see. There's something, though, that we don't see. What we don't see is the history. Let me tell you the history. You ready for this? Oh, this is so cool. Don't turn here. Don't turn. You won't keep up. Judges chapter 3, Shamgar slays 600 Philistines with an ox goad. 600 of them. An Israelite destroys 600 Philistines with an ox goad. In Judges chapter 14 through chapter 16, it tells the story of Samson. And after his wedding to a Philistine woman, he killed 30 men, Philistine men. And the Philistines, they were so upset about it that they attacked a Judean city called Lehi. And Samson used the jawbone of an ass to kill 1,000 of those men. And his final act of war was when he pushed the mighty pillars down and he killed 3,000 men. So now we've got in Judges 14, 15, and 16, 4,030 men that one Israelite killed. And he never squeezed the trigger. He did it with his hands. 1 Samuel chapter 7, we find some great victory. The Philistines had attacked Mizpah, and Samuel begins to pray. And when Samuel prayed, a great thunder came out of the sky, and it brought such confusion to the Philistine army that they went into a chaotic panic, and many of them died in the panic because Israel stepped back and literally watched them going back and forth. They just slaughtered them because the Philistines were running at them. I got one more for you. You're saying, where are you going with this? I got something to tell you. 1 Samuel chapter 13. By the way, who said about the nuggets? You find those nuggets? This is a nugget right here. This is a big gold nugget right here. This is the kind that if you were a rapper, you would put it around your neck with a chain. This is a big gold nugget right here, okay? In 1 Samuel chapter 13 through chapter 14, about midway, the prophet Samuel had chastised Saul for an unlawful offering sacrifice that Saul had offered. Now listen to this. Because of that chastisement, Saul moved 600 men to Geba. Now, when that took place, here's what happens. Jonathan then, he adopts the plan that his daddy's got, and Jonathan sends 2 men to a town called Michmash, where those 2 men killed only 20 Philistines. But because the Philistines were so amazed at the fact that 2 men could kill 20 of their army, the Philistine troops launched a war, and they ended up being destroyed themselves. Now, you ready for the nugget? The Philistine army is terrible. Do you know that I did a little bit of study on this, and I found out that in approximately 15 wars, only 2 of those wars did they accomplish a win, so to speak. But after they won, God sent Israel back in to take over again. So technically they didn't win any. Their army is awful. These boys could whip the Philistine army. I'm telling you. You're going to miss this. I so want you to see this before I can tell you, but you're not going to until I tell you. So you got to see this, okay? Israel's on this side. They said, "Hey! You want to fight?" Philistines said, "Yeah, I guess so." And Israel said, bring it on. And the Philistines said, you bring it on. And Israel said, I'm not bringing it on. You bring it on. And the Philistines said, what are you going to do about it? And Israel said, well, let's fight. And the Philistines said, we got a guy. We got a guy. We're going to send our monster down there. And Israel is over here going, well, bring it on. And then all of a sudden the monster shows up. You guys didn't know there's monsters in the Bible, but there are. He's got a massive head. It's huge. He's got a helmet that hangs down like this. He's got this great big coat of chain. It's heavy. He's got hands. I mean, his fingers are like this. It look like Edward Scissorhand. He's got a hold of this weaver's beam, and he's got a little peon guy down there going, your shield is heavy. And he marches down into the bottom of that valley where there is nobody. There's nobody there. You say, well, is that it? No. Do you know that on the other side of that valley was Israel, scared totally to death about the leader of the worst army ever? They can't win nothing. Every time they go into battle, they die. One guy picks up the jawbone of a dead animal and takes out 4,030 of them. That's how that battle started. One jawbone. About that long. About that long. Had probably some teeth in the backside of it. It was hooked around. He grabbed a hold of that thing. It didn't even go straight. It was like this. He picked up that thing and he said, all right, let's go. And the Philistines said, you want to fight? And he took that jawbone and he beat the devil out of them guys. And they died. Now, if that's an army, they've got on helmets. They've got on coat of mail. They've got on shields. They've got on their swords and all this. And one guy walks in to that many men and says, all right, here we go. Listen, Rambo ain't got nothing on Samson. But you know sometime he said, they drew first blood. They did. And he went to town on them and killed them. Every one of those wars, just the ones that I read to you tonight, the Philistines, yes, there were some Israelites that died. Yes, it's a battle. But every one of those wars, the majority of lives lost was lost in the Philistine army. They are not good at what they do. They are not good soldiers. They're not good warriors. They don't think right. They don't understand what they should do. I don't know who is telling them what they should do. Who is leading this? Is it Goliath? If so, he's not a good one. If it was his five brothers, I don't know. But somebody did not, they dropped the ball. They did not teach the Philistines how to fight. Because every single time the Philistines are involved in the army, in a war, they die. But here's Israel. I don't want to go out there. I'm afraid. Let's hunker down and hide. Let's stay right here. If we're not careful, we will allow our perception of the enemy to decide what we believe the outcome will be. And that is not the truth. We start looking at the enemy and we have an assumption of what the outcome will be. And we don't realize that the enemy loses every time.
cannot tell you how many times I've been on my face and I've said, God, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of fighting this. I can't win this. I give up. And the Lord says this, why are you so willing to believe that the enemy is going to win when they lose every single time? Every time they lose. So why is it that we believe what we see is better than what God knows? When you don't walk in the Spirit of God, your eyes will deceive you into believing something is true that's not. Amen. Yep. Common sense is not as common, but it goes a long way. And what we know to be true, because you gave the testimonies tonight at the number of times that look what God did, God blessed, God gave. Even in the children, even in their testimonies, I have a house, I have a family, I have snacks, I have great things. Look what God's done. God answered my prayer. I was worried I couldn't do all of this. Look what God's done. God sent men to help. Like the number of times that every time that we got discouraged and down, that God was there standing the whole time going, trust me, trust me. And you know what? We're looking at what we believe is a war going on, and actually there's nobody in the valley. They're over there on the other side going, bring it on, bring it on. And the Christians are over here going, we can't win this. We can't, there's no way. We might as well give up and hide. When David, which we'll see, but when David shows up and David says the phrase, remember the phrase, is there not a cause? Isn't it possible, if you can think for a second, isn't it possible that it's not just the fact that we've got this giant of a man in the valley by himself with this shield bearer, that he's cursing our God, and maybe David's not going, is there not a cause why we should go down there and whip his tail because he's bad-mouthing our God? But maybe David, the shepherd boy, has heard the stories of all of his warrior brothers time after time after time after time, and how that they fought the Philistines and the Philistines lost. How they fought the Philistines, the Philistines lost. How we fought the Philistines, the Philistines lost. And David is going, why are we not going down there? Guess what? They lose every time. Why are we afraid? There's nobody in the valley. There's no great warrior there. We're God's people. And we're afraid of something that we assume it's not true. In the passage, if you will, go there with me. I don't know if you're going to get as excited about this as I have, but I'm enjoying it. Look at verse 5. Had a helmet of brass upon his head. He was armed with a coat of mail. We read those. Verse 7, the staff was of his spear was like a weaver's beam. The spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. Listen, don't allow the enemy to define your element of success. God's way more powerful in your life than what you've given God credit for. He really is. Look down, if you will, in verse 9. He says this, verse 8. He stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. Now, there's something interesting that goes along with this morning's message. Something interesting said by Goliath in verse 8. I hope you don't miss this. He says this to them. Are you not servants to Saul? Now, if you're a servant to Saul, what does Saul become? He's the leader. What's Goliath say about himself? There's no leader. So when every man does that which is right in his own eyes, what does that create? Chaos. And in chaos, there's no victory. So the Philistines live in chaos, because they have no leadership, and with no leadership, they're losing battle after battle after battle after battle. And yet, we've got the Israelites over here who have a leader, and they're winning and winning and winning and winning and winning, and they're the ones that are afraid. Something's wrong. Something is, so the perception is wrong. Verse 9. If he be able to fight with me, so he calls, choose you a man for you, let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. So I guess what they were planning to do was everybody's going to pick 3 or 4 of them and say, okay, you're mine, you're mine, you're mine. Verse 10, the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Of what? Of what were they afraid? Listen, if you know the history of the Philistines, you don't have much to be afraid of. You can pretty much guarantee they're going to lose. Now, I played football for a season in high school. I had a friend named Tawan that I got to play with on his team and all that. We had a great time. There were times that when we were being talked to by the coach would say something like this: we've played this team before, we're going to win. You know what he knew about that other team? He knew that they were going to lose. There were times when another team would show up and they would have on a big helmet and shoulder pads, and they would have on their jersey, and they had on new cleats, and they had on their little glove, and they had all this, and they were ready to go. They looked mean, but they couldn't play. Oh, they were terrible. I mean, the quarterback would throw the ball, and the ball would fall in front of them, and then they would run over top of it. I mean, this terrible. And you could hear their parents, "What's wrong with you? You're going home with somebody else." I mean, all this. And so it was easy to beat them because we knew something about them. It was easy to defeat them before the game in our own mind because we already know they don't play well. You used to take kids to camp. We go to camp. We'd have a volleyball team. We get our volleyball team together. We would see who we were going to be playing. Oh, you're going to be playing this church. Okay, well, I know something about that church. There's one girl that's pretty good, and they're always going to put her on the front line. They're always going to put her on the net. And it's going to be a bump, set, and spike. And you stay away from that net, because when she hits the ball, it never goes straight down. It always goes to the middle of the court. So if you'll back up just a little bit, no matter where she's at, know that she's going to hit it in this area. And she did it every single time. And she could not figure out why she was not able to get one on us, because we already did our research and we knew how she played. But everybody else couldn't play. She would get mad and she would say, "Do I have to play the whole court?" And she would bump, set, and spike for herself almost. I mean, she was just running around ragged. And finally, I mean, it would be, the score would be so in our favor, it would just be crazy. And they would just say, "You know what? You guys win." Okay. You know how we won? Because before the battle, we knew something about the history. Now, see if you can finish this. I've read the end of the book and we... If you already know the history, why are you cowering before Satan? There's nobody in the valley. And the one guy that shows up, he's not a good leader. He did not train his army to battle. It's a one-man show. He comes down, he says, send out your guy that you can fight me, and then if I win, then we'll all serve you, and if he wins, then you all have to serve us. And Israel was scared totally to death. We know the history. They're not going to win. You know what happened? You don't know what happened? Let me tell you what happened. David says to his brothers, let me go. I'll go fight him. And you know what? They laughed at him. You know why they laughed? He doesn't have a helmet, doesn't have a coat of mail, doesn't have his loins girded. He doesn't have those fancy cupped shoes that goes over your toes. He didn't have those. He didn't have a great big sword that weighed as much as him, and he didn't have anybody carrying his shield around with him because he didn't even have any of that stuff. You know what he had? His brain. He was a thinker. See, when you're a shepherd and you're watching over sheep, you have to always be thinking. If I was a sheep and I was going to try to escape, would I go out that? Oh, I need to fix that so that doesn't happen. Oh, if I was going to need shade, where would I go? Oh, I need to go over here to this tree. You got to always be thinking. Your mind never shuts off. You got to always be watching. Always be watching. Because see, sometimes the wolf will sneak in and try to kill your sheep. And when the wolf comes in and tries to kill your sheep, you have to be prepared to kill the wolf in place of the sheep. So somebody's going to die. Recently, I gotta tell you this. I found out that there's a wolf that thought he was going to destroy our sheep. And I said, I'm ready. Because you know what I know about his history? He loses every time. Because he's not listening to the Spirit of God. Yeah, I'm telling you. Isn't it cool to be on God's side? Yeah, it is. So David, listen to this. David, he says, I'll go. So you know what they did? They sent him to Saul because Saul's a leader. When he goes to Saul, he says to Saul, I'll go out there and fight them. I'll fight that guy. And Saul says, well, I mean, you don't even have gear. You're not even prepared. I mean, you can't even go hammock camping. You got nothing. He's like, well, I don't need a hammock. I sleep on the ground. I got sheep to cuddle up with. It's cozy. He says, well, here, I want you to do this. I want you to put my helmet on. You know how it is when you get a hat that's too big for you and it comes down and pushes your ears down like this, and it's like hanging right here. You know what I'm talking about? Where you turned your head too fast and the hat's still around there like that. Like that. And so David's got he's got this helmet on, and the thing that goes right here on his nose is down here on his chin like this, and he's trying to look around the sides. And then he puts on this coat of mail, and he's not little like them, but he's a young man, but he's not as big as these warrior guys. He's a shepherd guy. He's not a warrior. So he's got this coat of mail, and he's starting to do this. If you have experienced up north snow, you know what the little boy, remember the boy in the commercial and he's like this? Like that. So that's David in the gear. And then he said, here's my sword. Can you imagine he reached out to take the sword? And then he has to look at Saul and he says to Saul, I can't do this. I haven't practiced with this. I've not proved them. I don't even know how to use them. I didn't plan for that. I know how to use one thing. I know how to use a sling. I got this leather strap. I split it, and I made a little bag in the middle of it. And I can wrap part of it around this finger right here, and I can grab a hold of this end of the other side. And if I put a stone in that sling, I know how to make that rock fly and land where I want it to. I was watching a guy the other day. I was reading about this. This guy who is a shepherd, and he talks about this. We have it in our head because I preach it this way too, that the sling, he was like, shh, like this, and he lets go one strap and the rock flies out and all that. But there was more to it than that. These guys were so good that when they would sling around, their whole body would go, and they could do like this, and that thing would go through a tree. Like it would, the power in what they were able to do with those things is unreal. David says, this is what I can use. And David's got on his little bag, his little satchel he's got to take and put some rocks in. So what are you doing? I'm putting my bag on. What are you going to do with that? And put rocks in it. Rocks? Yeah, I'm going to put rocks in it. When I get down there to that water, I'm going to pick up some stones and I'm going to put rocks in my bag. Can you imagine Saul going, the boy doesn't want to use my sword, he doesn't want anything, he's going to go down there and fight this giant of a man. He's going to die. He's going to die. Keep this in mind. Goliath said, if I win, you serve us. But Saul still said, okay. Listen, here's the next thought. Sometimes we're willing to give over to the loss of a battle when God said you've already won this battle. We've claimed a loss. We've claimed, well, we're just going to have to serve the enemy because we can't win it anyway. When God says, no, the battle's already won. They can't win. I win. Well, Lord, we lost the battle. There's just no way. Wait, God says, no. It's not about you have to make a way. I've already made the way, and you win. Listen, this may be a stretch. It would not have mattered who went into that valley as long as God was leading. It could have been a girl. It could have been another animal. It could have been a donkey go down there and I'm mad about my friend's jaw and just went like that one time and down he went. It could have been anything. But what we do know is this. What we do know is that when David went with the authority of God to fight that battle. Boys, he went down to that brook and he knelt down at that brook. You always keep your eye on your enemy. And he reached down and he got 5 smooth stones. He wants them to be able to fly through that air real quick. He puts them in his bag. And he draws out of that bag 1 stone and he puts it in that sling. And he lets that sling hang right there. I think the presentation of the power of God was important. David didn't go down there mouthing off at Goliath. He didn't go down there with his mouth flying. Who are you? You can't say anything. You're just all talk. He didn't do any of that. He kept his mouth shut. He went down with one thing that came out of his mouth, and that was, you come to me with all of that, but I come to you with the authority of God. Amen. And then the battle goes into play. Do you know, it doesn't say that the Philistine drew his sword, told the armor bearer to stand over here, and he went like this. He didn't get prepared. He was just there. David is the only one there's an account that had any motion in it. David began to sling that sling around. Every one of you could see it though, couldn't you? Right there, they're like, hope we don't let go of it. They're back there ducking. That's so funny. That's so funny. You get that slinging around like that, Can you hear it? And at the right time, in slow motion, because you can't see it happen this way with your eyes. You can't see it with your eyes. In slow motion, that sling opened. David didn't even let go of it yet. The leather strap opened. God's hand reached in and grabbed a hold of that rock. And when David was told by God to let go of that strap, and it flew out like this to Goliath,
God went like this. And hit that bozo right between the eyes. Now, how did it hit him between the eyes when he's got that helmet on like that? In slow motion, the rock flew at his face and went around it and poked him right in the head. Y'all just need to read your Bible, that's all I'm telling you. It's there. And when listen, that rock hit him in the head, and instead of flying backwards, he fell forward. And I just say there's only one reason that's possible, and that was that God stood behind him and said, lay down. Down he went, but he's not dead yet. See, sometimes in battle, our perception of the battle will determine the continuation of how we battle. If David looks at a Goliath that is down on his face, he might assume the battle's over. It's not. Sometimes you think that because you have accomplished one thing, I learned one thing, or I grew in that one thing, and look what the devil has deceived me, and look, now he's down. Listen, he's not dead. He's not dead. It's not over yet. You just got him down. But David goes, and David knows the only way to defeat this guy is I've got to take his head off. Isn't it great when you can just take the head off of Satan? David goes and stands over top of him, and he takes that sword of that giant. I imagine that it was probably all adrenaline, and he picked that sword up, and he came down like this. And that old head just went. Now, I've never been there when an actual beheading took place, but I imagine that his facial expression was not a smile. But here's what's interesting. When Israel won those battles, every battle that they fought, every war that they fought, when a king would be captured and killed, they cut off his head. They would take him by the hair, lift his head up, and they would put him on a pole. I don't have a really good way of doing it, but so they take his head, they put it on the pole, and they would march back into town to show the enemy that was running, we have your authority. We took control. Here it is. And they would go to their place of battle, and they would plant that thing, and there his head would be. Blood dripping out the bottom. Snot coming out the nose. His hair would be a wreck. It's a lot like your mom in the morning. It's very similar. Very similar. Don't repeat that. Okay. Anyway. Sorry. Miss Jennifer, sorry. Not really. It's like that. No. But this one's different. This one's different. When David picks up the head of Goliath. Remember how big it is? Picks up the head of Goliath. David carries that head, being followed by the army, back into Jerusalem. When they go into Jerusalem, he plants it. And everybody that rides by can see the leader that claimed to win lost. It is the only, according to, from then till today, it is the only head that has ever been planted in that place in Jerusalem.
It today is known as the place of the skull. It is the place where the enemy of God lost. God wins.
Right.
I'll tell you what, if you allow your perception of the battle to defeat you, you'll miss out on some great blessings. Because the place of the skull is today the place that we know where our Savior hung. And he didn't lose his head. We gained an eternity because of that.
Right.
But if we're not careful, we'll look at the victory of God and we'll say, there's no way we can do it. There's no way we can do it. David did not lead those people later on as king because he went to school and figured it out. God used him to teach those people here that God is the one in control, not the army. David was told by his men, even when Saul was king, it was you that led us. Not because he was the king, although he'd been anointed, but because he trusted God. Just trust God, or your perception of the battle will be wrong. There's nobody in the valley. There's no enemy there. They're afraid. You know why? I know their history. They're terrible. They cannot win. Only God wins every single time. Isn't that amazing? Well, that's what I thought I'd share with you tonight. I hope it means something to you. It means a lot to me. Before we go, let's have a word of prayer. But before we go, I have something to share with you about what God's doing, and then we'll be dismissed.